Hey Chevette owners, it is finally time to get to Scooter and this 215 Buick. And what we're going to do is we're going to dive headfirst into the assembly on this engine right after a little bit of history, and today we're going to get into oiling modifications, the reasons why they have to happen, and what to watch for when you're going through this. Now this applies to any Buick engine, V6 or V8. It is not something that is specific to the 215, although the 215 probably had the smallest oil passages of any Buick. By about the mid-70s, at least with the big blocks, they discovered that they were really in need of a larger oil feed. Or the small blocks rather. They found out they needed a larger oil feed. The V6s got a larger oil feed, and they started to improve casting, as well as the drilling process. Once they got around 85 up, we started seeing the Series 1 engines, all front-wheel drive specific stuff. And that progressed into the 3800 Series 2 that everybody knows and loves. Those have great oiling systems. Buick really learned heavy from 1961 all the way up to 1985. They even sold the engine family once just to buy it back during the 77 fuel crisis. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and jump off this camera here real quick. This thing is just lightly assembled for display purposes and to store it properly and easily over in the corner. I'm going to get this laid out, and then I'm going to bring you guys in close so I can show you what we're working with and what actually has to be modified and why. Alright, so if you're going to build a Buick, you need to invest in some tools. These tools. Lots of these tools. Because you're going to be porting and polishing and enlarging holes all through the block, the oil pump, and the timing cover. This one is the absolute most fun because this is the longest hole in the entire block. This is the feed hole that comes down the middle of the block. I'll show you over here. Right here. Comes in right here, goes down through the casting, and then as you can see, it runs out the front of the block. When it comes out here, it then has to make a 90-degree bend into the oil pump, do a bunch of craziness in the oil pump, which I'll show you here in just a little bit, and then it has to come back up and make another 90 into the block. Now these oil passages are notoriously undersized from the factory. I'll show you the pickup. The pickup is always a little bit bigger than the hole because they have to account for the outside diameter. This 1/2-inch drill bit is the same as the outside diameter of this pickup. And the hole was very much smaller than that. I believe the hole was somewhere around this size. Yeah, this is the 5/16. It was just slightly bigger than the 5/16. And that was supposed to feed the entire engine, which I guess back in 61, 62, 63 when this engine was new, you kept it under 4,500 RPM and you just drove it around, like babied it around. It was going to live. It was going to do its job. The engine wasn't going to wear out before its life expectancy was up, which sadly was right around 50,000, 60,000 miles back then. So we're wanting to improve that. We want it to last a lot longer, and this car is also going to see some performance use, so this stuff was absolutely a must. You want to make sure that you have all of your drill bits set up ahead of time. You want to make sure that you are keeping some kind of a lubricant. In this particular case, because I'm drilling aluminum, I use a wax on the drill bits because it keeps the aluminum from building up and rolling into the threads or the cutting edge, and then gulling up the hole, making it really easy to break a bit off in there or just make the hole larger than it needs to be. So make sure you are going slowly, especially with this one. You're going to go in a little at a time and back it out. Chase the chaff out, which is the chips and things, re-lubricate your bit, and keep going. Just enough pressure to start cutting, just enough pressure to get you to go about 1 inch or so, and then back it out, keep going. So, as far as the block goes, I think I have, yes, I have a factory timing cover here to compare these two. Let me get this down here with this new one that are oh so pricey. Now, tolerances on your oil pump body, because this timing cover is also the oil pump, it's paramount that this is perfect. And the problem is you see the big giant grooves in here. The pump gears in this particular one have been walking around and digging into the side of this. There's been plenty of trash go through here. And this is opened up enough that it is no longer serviceable per Buick standards and well past most of the performance build standards. I think they, if I remember correctly, I got it wrote down. If I remember correctly, they want 005, no 003 here between the pump case and the pump gears, and this one's like 009 in some places. You also have to make sure that the bearings in these engines, the mains and the rods, are somewhere around an 002 clearance, because they want it very tight, because the way these oil, after it goes through here, it goes into this part of the timing cover, and then it comes up and dumps in back in here, and it does some craziness through here, back up through. After it goes through the pressure regulator, it comes back up through this part and into the block. And as you can see, I'm going to turn this one over, get the bolts out of it so it doesn't fall out. The holes I've got in this one are significantly larger in comparison. I can stick my index finger in that hole. Now, this is a timing cover that's set up for pretty much every Buick V8 out there. So this will even work on the ones that have the humongous 5/8 bore. So it's a little overkill on a 215. But what you have to do is you have to go through everything. As you can see, it's shiny down in there, because after this was done, I ran another bit through it to open this up, because even though this is okay as it came, I wanted all these ports to match. So this has been opened up, and then this hole has been chamfered, so there's nothing sticking up above the gasket surface. So you can see there's a significant difference in size here. And then the pump, I'll get this off here in just a second and I'll start showing you the pump modifications, but the pump adapter for the oil filter housing has also had some port work done to correct some really sharp angles, some casting flash, and then there's also a steel plate that has been added, and this is what they call a boost plate. And what it does is it gives the steel gears in here something steel to ride on rather than riding into this surface, which is also aluminum, which also ends up causing the pump gears to walk up and down, causing deeper case wear, causing more oil pump issues, causing less oil flow and oil pressure. It's crazy. So then we get back into where it goes back into the block. Now on this particular one, as you can see, I also had to enlarge the gasket to match, but this has been taken out to 1/2 inch, and then I had to drill up through here and then down through both of these galleries, because this is not large enough. As it feeds out of the block, it comes through the oil pump, comes back in here, and then instead of feeding the mains, it feeds the camshaft first, and only one side of the camshaft. It has to feed this side of the camshaft, it has to feed the rods and mains, and then it'll bleed over and feed this side and this row of lifters. It's a crazy oiling system. The problem, besides the fact that the holes are grossly undersized everywhere, because even here they've been enlarged, is alignment. Now this particular holes intersect with the cam bearings. As you can see, there's a big old oval hole right there. That used to be a tiny casting flash covered hole. Even though this was machined after the fact, they still left a bunch of casting flash on it. And I'll show you on the stock bearings as well as the new bearings what the difference is, because they corrected a little bit of this with new bearings because there's a design change that helped the misalignment from factory, but there's a better way to do it, and it's drill out the passage to a larger passage, connecting all the way through here, because sometimes it's not even broke all the way through, just a little bit. As you can imagine, oil's not getting where it needs to go, and a lot of these blocks suffered core shift issues, and tolerances back in the 60s were not very good. So what I've done was I've run all of these clear through all the way through to the journals, or to the lifter journal, making sure that they all intersect and they connect smoothly. I've gotten all the trash out of there, and then around the lifter bores was a ton of casting flash. And any of you that have built Buick V6s know very well what that's about. You don't want to remove any more material than you have to, because as you can see, the lifter bores are largely unsupported in a Buick, and much over a mild camshaft can actually break those out without a girdle. So you don't want to take any material off that you don't need to. Just sharp edges and just enough. That way oil, let me flip this thing over, will flow back to the pan quickly, because you want it up to the valve train so you can get it to the bottom end. But you also want anything that's trapped up here to get to the pan as fast as possible. And you see I've just gone around with a carbide and just cleaned up a little bit. You got in a couple of these tight areas with a hand file and a small sanding roll. One other thing that you have to do, especially with the flat tappet camshafts in any engine, but especially a Buick, is to make sure that the lifter bores are very smooth and burr free. And you want to take all your lifters out and you want to drop them in there, and you want to try them by hand to make sure that there's not getting caught on anything, because they have to spin as they're traveling up and down. If they don't spin, that's how you wipe out camshaft lobes. And then of course here I run a bit down through so I can get into the intersecting areas. And then something a Buick does prior to, I think, 65 or 67, I can't remember when they changed. But these early ones do not oil the valve train through the push rods. Push rods on these engines are solid. And there's an oil port in the cylinder head that lines up with the oil port on the cylinder's deck surface that's fed off of those journals. And that actually goes up and leaves oil through these rocker shafts from around the bolts. It goes up around the bolts right there, and then through the shafts, and then there's grooves in there. As these rocker arms move, it lets oil bleed past. So you have to have a really good oiling system in these Buicks in order for them to live if you're going to play with them. This one was okay, but the cam bearings I pulled out of here, let's see if I can find them here. I don't think I put them, maybe I didn't keep them. Maybe I didn't keep them. At any rate, I can show you the difference between the two. One, the factory ones are just a small tiny hole, and then the replacements, where did I put, there they are. These replacement cam bearings, because this has been such a problem for so long. As you can see, this one here, I believe this is the rear, still has just a round hole. Now I'm going to chamfer the back side of this before I put it in, just so there's a little bit of, you don't have any more oil, any oil on any sharp edges getting stuck there. We want no oil getting stuck anywhere. So light chamfer on the back of that, but that's how they used to all be. Because there's alignment issues, they have made the replacement bearings with oval holes. That's how bad these things were. And you have to make sure that when you drive them in, sometimes you got to drive them in further back or further forward than they're supposed to sit to line up with those journals if you don't drill them out. This one had 2 and 3 really far off. They suggest that you put these holes at 3 and 7 o'clock, I believe, if I remember correctly. In this particular instance, I only have to line them up so the oil hole is lined up with that oil groove at some place between there and there, which is the other nice thing about having that opened up. It gives a lot more leeway to install your cam bearings. These get crazy. This is one of the engines that requires a cam bearing that's specific to every location. They start out larger at the front of the engine and get smaller on the way back. They're all numbered. And this gives you, in case you screw it up, it gives you the position and the part number that's stamped into the bearing. Now that's just the camshaft bearings, and that's something that a lot of the bearing companies have come up with years ago to fix these Buick problems. One other thing is the mains. The mains used to be solid. They now have the big groove. And they also have not only the groove, but as you can see, they have that extra long hole. And again, this was because from the factory, I'm going to have to flip this back over here. Hold on a second, I'll stick this in my pocket so we don't ruin this bearing. From the factory, none of these holes were drilled straight. And I'm sure if you look at this, and you were to draw a line across those, you could see they do not line up. They line up better now with the bearings because they have been opened up and chamfered, but they didn't used to. And so this was the fix. I'm not going to stick it all the way down in there, but you can see it lines up dead center with this one because the hole was opened up. But sometimes those holes are over here, sometimes those holes are up here. And in some cases, they're actually almost over here to the edge. So you have to really go in here. If they're really far off, even with the bearings and the extra size, you still have to do an extra chamfer to trough the oil over to the hole. It's been on years since I've seen one that bad, but I've seen them that bad. And then your rod bearings. Your rod bearings are pretty standard issue stuff. Nothing crazy. These are just basic bearing shells. And there was no need to go any further with these particular bearings, because by the time the oil gets to the rods, it's the last thing it sees. So you have to make sure that the mains are properly spec'd so the rods aren't getting starved, as with any engine, but in particular the Buick. Trying to think. If you install the cam bearings properly, you shouldn't have no need to turn your old camshaft into a cutting tool. There's very limited core shift in the cam tunnel on these engines, and a lot of times what happens is people will install cam bearings. They find out that when they go to jam the cam in, it fits 2 or 3 in, and then it stops because they've got a camshaft or a cam bearing that's burred up from installation. It's usually not because it needs to be honed out, as some say. It's because they used an improperly sized tool and it put a little burr on the edge of the camshaft bearing. So you want to try to avoid that and use proper installation tools for your camshaft bearings. Now I'm going to get this camera on the stand for just a second. I'm going to go ahead and get this pump housing off of here. And I'm going to show you what has to happen inside that pump. Okay, so we're going to start with the timing cover itself. As you can see, I brought the bit in through there from the back side, and then I had to get down inside there. Well, you can see that. You get down inside there, and I had to clean up a bunch of that in there. There's also a transition from this side to this side of the pump, and that hole down there in the bottom had to be opened up. Then that hole exiting had to be opened up and then cleaned up, so it has a smoother transition down into this area here. So all the burrs have to come off, and then this part here also has to get enlarged, and that gets drilled all the way down to that position right there that goes back into the block. You have to make sure that your gear's set in here deep enough that this thin paper gasket right here that is 0.001 thick sets your end gap on your pump. You also have to very carefully trim out your gasket for these enlarged areas on this pump housing. That's the tedious part right there. It's getting them holes cut. Okay, so then once you have your gasket on there, I'm gonna set this down so I don't set it down hard and break it, because that's a very expensive part. You'll get your gasket on there, okay, and then you've got your gears. You need 0.03 between them and the case, and again, this paper gasket sets your end play, and that pump needs to be dead tight. This used to be the wear surface, and as you can see, the gears eat into it. And the fix for that was this boost plate, or thrust plate. And there's some modifications even to it that need to be done, because all of these holes need to line up, every one of these holes. If it's a funny oval shape, on one side and it's smaller on the other, you have to taper them to make sure everything flows smoothly. This already had the hole enlarged, so I just matched this as well as the timing cover. And then that goes on like so. And that gives the gears a steel surface to line up with. And as you can see, that big oval hole right there ended up just being that small hole in the end. And eventually, before this is done, there are 2 roll pins that will be drilled into the body that keep all of this centered. I literally have to drill a tiny hole all the way through this to keep this all together. It's tedious. And then you have the new gasket for the sandwich plate that goes between the sandwich plate and the pump body. And then you have the pump body itself. And there's still a little bit in this rectangular hole right down here that I have to clean up yet before that's all assembled on both sides, because it needs a little bit of flash taken out right down there. And then I think, if I remember correctly, there was a spot that overlapped either in the sandwich plate or here that still needs to be massaged so it's all the same size. But that takes care of the pump. The only thing I have left now is to get the later V6 oil pickup and then modify it to move the sump to the back where this one had to be moved to. So this is what has to be done just in order to get them to live. I don't shortcut Buicks in any way. Even on something that I'm going to drive on the street, that I see daily type driver use, still going to get oiling mods. If it's pre-85 for sure. So, that being said, that concludes the oiling modifications for the Buick engine. I am now going to spend tomorrow putting a little bit of it together, and then I'm going to get you guys on camera for a bunch of assembly, and we'll walk through all those processes. Things to watch for specifically on the aluminum block, and then as you're assembling, because fasteners like to gall up threads, so you want to be careful. And then we're just going to keep plugging away on Scooter until this is done. We didn't obviously make New Year's to listen to it even turn over, but I'm going to keep us as on schedule as I can possibly keep us for the next couple weeks at minimum, just so I can get at least this engine assembled and then get the transmission done and then get it all in the car. Everything's going to start going real fast once that's assembled. So, in the meantime, I will see you guys tomorrow. You have a safe and happy New Year, and keep the shiny side up. And if you've had anything to drink tonight, don't even bother trying to drive your car with the shiny paint, or your beater for that matter. Just call somebody else to come get you.